The cold is unforgiving. It gnaws at the skin, burrows into the bones, and there, it lingers like a reminder of the world beyond the wire. Winter's breath grips the barracks, a suffocating chill that blankets each of us. We're lined up for the morning count. Thin uniforms, hollow faces, and eyes that have seen too much. The only thing stirring in this stillness is the guard's boots, crunching on frozen ground. I am Henri, or what's left of him. I used to be more than just a number, more than just a shadow in the snow. I was a farm boy from Normandy with dreams of fighting for France. But after 2 years in this camp, even the memories feel like they belong to someone else. It's almost laughable. The things that tether you to hope when your world is reduced to fences and barbed wire. For me, it's my family. My mother, who waited on the doorstep every evening, searching the horizon for her only son. My fiancée, Marie, the smell of her lavender perfume lingering on her letters, though they stopped coming a year ago. I've clung to these small things, wrapped them around my heart so tightly that, even in this place, I haven't fully let go of hope. The guards finish their count and bark orders. Today's work is different. I spot a British soldier I've come to know, Richard, a quiet man with a gaze as sharp as broken glass. He'd been a mechanic before the war, someone used to working with his hands, building and fixing, turning nothing into something. But here, his hands only tremble, fingers clenching and unclenching like he's waiting for a tool that will never come. I catch his eye as they push us toward the trucks. There's something simmering beneath his calm, a tension that I recognize all too well. He nods back, subtly, a gesture so slight that only someone who's been looking as closely as I have would notice. Today, they're loading us into trucks, packed like livestock, rattling toward the forest where the ground is still soft enough to dig. It's the kind of labor that makes your hands blister and bleed, but the pain is nothing compared to the satisfaction of simply moving, of doing something that doesn't feel like submission. We're barely out of the truck when I spot a face among the prisoners that's both familiar and foreign. A Russian, maybe late 30s, his face marked by deep lines and a scar that stretches from his left brow to the corner of his mouth. He doesn't flinch or shrink under the guard's glares. No, he stands tall, almost defiant, something in him burning in a way I haven't seen in a long time. I catch his name from a guard's sneer, Alexei. For the past weeks, whispers have floated around, carried in muttered French and broken English. Whispers of a plan, a way out, a chance to see the sky without barbed wire slicing it into pieces. Each whisper feels like a life raft, a dangerous temptation to dream. We know it's foolish, impossible even, but the urge to escape is like a hunger gnawing at our insides. And now, with Alexei here, that hunger is taking shape. He's seen the worst, survived horrors we can't imagine, and yet he stands with the look of someone who hasn't lost himself. Later that evening, as darkness drapes over the camp like a shroud, we sit huddled in the barracks, warming our hands over a pitiful fire that's more smoke than flame. Richard sits beside me, and, a moment later, Alexei drifts over, drawn by some silent understanding. "We don't have long," Alexei murmurs, his voice rough and steady. His English is thick, but his words come sharp and deliberate. "They'll send us to other camps soon. We need to act." Richard's eyes narrow. "And what exactly do you propose? Walking out the front gate? They'd shoot us down before we got 10 paces. Alexei smirks, a flash of that defiant spirit lighting his tired eyes. "Not the front. The woods. There's a break in patrols every third night. The trucks come on a schedule. With enough distraction, we could be gone before they know it." I feel my pulse quicken, the thrill of freedom so close I can almost taste it. But then, just as quickly, dread sinks its claws into me. Freedom isn't free. Comes at a cost I'm not sure I can pay. My gaze flicks to the corner of the barracks, where the others huddle, some so frail they can barely stand, others broken in ways that no amount of freedom could mend. How could we leave them? How could I leave them? Richard is watching me, his face a mask of calm, but his fingers twist the edge of his shirt, a habit of his when he's holding back. "Henri," he says quietly, "we can't save everyone, but if we have a chance, we should take it." Alexei's voice cuts through, resolute. "Every man here has made his choice already. Some fight for freedom, some for revenge. But we all share one thing: we can't stay here." The air grows thick, heavy with the weight of our silent agreement. Each of us has our reasons, our ghosts. I think of Marie, her voice lingering in my mind like a melody from a life I can barely remember. I think of my mother, of her laughter echoing through our little kitchen. And I think of this life here, where each breath feels borrowed, stolen from the edge of death itself. We don't shake hands or make solemn oaths. There's no need. In the firelight, the resolve in our eyes speaks louder than any words could. A few hours later, as we lie in our bunks, the barracks quiet around us, I feel the full weight of what we're about to attempt. The fear sinks its teeth into me, gnawing away at my resolve. But alongside it is something else, a faint flicker of defiance that refuses to be extinguished. I won't let this place rob me of what little I have left. I won't become another nameless, hollow face in the morning line. Tomorrow we'll begin preparing, and as I close my eyes, a prayer slips from my lips, barely more than a whisper. For freedom, for survival, for hope. The words linger in the silence, fragile and fierce, an echo that stretches far beyond these walls. The first night of planning is a strained symphony of whispered arguments, stolen glances, and barely restrained hope. Richard, Alexei, and I huddle in a dark corner of the barracks while the others sleep, our voices low, barely audible over the creaks and groans of the ancient wood. The flickering light from a small, smuggled candle casts long shadows across our faces, highlighting the lines that each of us has earned in this hell. Alexei sketches rough lines in the dirt between us, his finger tracing the shape of the camp, the guards' watchtowers, and the area we call the pit, the makeshift punishment yard. His hand moves with purpose, deliberate and precise. He's been watching the guards' routines for weeks, making note of every pause, every small chink in the fortress they believe is unbreakable. The east fence is weakest here. He taps the ground with his finger, and I watch as the dirt shifts under the pressure. There's a 10-minute gap at dusk, just after the trucks pull in. They think we're all too weak or too broken to try anything. Richard looks up, his blue eyes cold and intense. And they're right about most of us. He mutters, but there's no cruelty in his tone. It's just a fact. Only those of us with enough fight left have gathered here tonight. The others, those who sleep in the bunks around us, are husks, men who've been emptied out by the endless cruelty and despair. I glance toward the other prisoners, the ones we won't be able to bring. Leaving them feels like a betrayal, a weight that sits heavily on my chest. But Richard's right. Most would only slow us down or worse, alert the guards with their unsteady steps and desperate gasps. I try to silence the guilt, telling myself that if we succeed, maybe we can come back. Maybe we can help others once we're out. I know it's a lie. This might be the last time I see their faces. Henri, Richard's voice cuts through my thoughts, pulling me back to the task at hand. We'll need supplies, food, cloth for our wounds, anything we can find to keep us going in the cold. Do you know who might have access? I nod slowly. Pierre. He works in the kitchen, has a knack for slipping things out when the guards aren't looking. Pierre and I share a quiet bond. We met back in the early days, when I still believed I'd be freed in a matter of months. He's a wiry, quick-thinking man, once a chef in Marseille. Since he started in the kitchen, he's been feeding our small fires of rebellion with stale bread, bruised apples, whatever he could smuggle without suspicion. Alexei leans closer, his dark eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. Then go to him, but make sure he understands the risk. If they catch us, we all pay. His tone is calm, resolute, a man who's faced death enough times to know it by name. I don't sleep that night. None of us do. Our bodies are stretched thin by exhaustion, but our minds buzz with a restless energy. I lie in the darkness, staring up at the rotting wooden beams overhead, trying to imagine what lies beyond the fence. I picture open fields, snow-dusted and untouched. The idea of a sky that isn't divided by barbed wire feels surreal, like a story I was told as a child but never truly believed. The next day, as we're marched to our work assignments, I catch sight of Pierre. He's in the kitchen yard, stirring a vat of thin, tasteless soup under the watchful eye of a guard. I make eye contact, offering a subtle nod, and he replies with a barely there lift of his brow. That's all we need. The message is understood. That evening, he slips me a scrap of bread, along with a hint of what he has managed to collect. 2 pieces of cloth, some dried beans, and a small flask of water. It's not much, but in this place, it's the difference between life and death. I thank him with a look, but I don't say the words aloud. We both know what's at stake. As the next few days pass, we fall into a pattern, preparing in small, careful steps. Every night we gather, reviewing our plan, refining it, making small adjustments based on the guard's movements. Richard keeps us focused, his meticulous attention to detail preventing us from growing careless, while Alexei drives us forward, reminding us of what awaits us if we don't seize this chance. On the 3rd night, Richard pulls me aside, his face a mask of tension. "There's something else, Henri," he says, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I've been thinking about the guards, the new ones they brought in last week. They're less disciplined, sloppy. It's a weakness we can use." He's right. The new guards are young, barely out of their teens, and they seem uncomfortable with the brutality around them. Maybe they don't yet carry the same hatred that some of the others do. Maybe there's a part of them that still remembers the world outside these fences. Whatever the reason, it's a crack in the wall, a sliver of a chance, and we're desperate enough to grasp it. As the plan solidifies, I start to feel the first tremors of real fear. This is no longer a dream whispered in the darkness. It's a ticking clock, counting down to the moment we make our move. I can feel it pulsing in my veins, the cold, stark realization that once we begin, there's no turning back. Finally, the night comes. We gather one last time, our supplies hidden beneath our threadbare clothes. Alexei goes over the plan one final time, his voice steady, unshaken, as if this is just another step in his long journey through this war. Richard watches him with quiet intensity, nodding at each instruction, his jaw clenched. And me, I feel as though I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the unknown. My heart pounds in my chest, each beat a reminder that, after tonight, nothing will ever be the same. As we disperse, slipping into our places, I close my eyes and whisper a silent promise to myself, to Marie, to my mother. I promise to find my way back to them, to see the fields of Normandy again, to feel the warmth of the sun on my skin, unfiltered, unbroken by fences. And as I settle into my position, waiting for the moment to strike, I feel a strange calm wash over me. We might not all make it, but this is our choice, our fight. And even if we fall, we'll fall as men, not as numbers. The clock ticks down, the guards shift, and, with a final glance at my comrades, I take the first step toward freedom. When the clock strikes the hour, The barracks are cloaked in silence, heavy and electric. The camp itself seems to hold its breath as we make our move. Alexei leads us, his steps calculated, each footfall like a heartbeat of defiance against this place. The guards on duty tonight are among the newer ones, young, bored, careless with their routines. But even so, our lives now hang on a single thread of timing, on the fickle mercy of fortune. Alexei's plan demands precision, and each of us knows the role we play as we edge closer to the eastern fence. My palms are damp, and my breath is shallow. Every sound, every creak of the snow underfoot, every rustle of fabric, feels amplified, magnified 100-fold against the stillness. It's almost impossible to move without shivering, the cold biting through our thin clothes and into our skin, but somehow we keep pressing forward. We have to. The first guard post is barely visible through the darkness, just a shadow moving against the faint light. Alexei signals, and Richard and I crouch low behind a snow-covered stack of empty barrels while Alexei edges closer. His approach is silent, deadly, each step as deliberate as a predator closing in on its prey. I can hardly see him as he reaches the guard, who's staring off into the dark forest beyond, lost in thought or fatigue. Alexei moves like a wraith, slipping behind him, and in a single, swift motion, he covers the guard's mouth and pulls him down to the ground, holding him until his struggles cease. Alexei doesn't waste a moment. He rifles through the guard's pockets, taking a key ring and a knife. Then, without a backward glance, he gestures for us to follow. My heart hammers against my chest as I step over the guard's limp form, swallowing the bile that rises in my throat. I'm a soldier, I remind myself. I've seen death before, but it's different here, different in the silence and shadows, different when the stakes are so close to home. The fence is just ahead, a dark line cutting through the snow, stretching out into the forest beyond. Richard crouches beside me, his eyes fixed on the space where Alexei is now working, using the guard's key to open a small gate meant for maintenance workers. I glance at Richard, and in that moment, I see the same blend of fear and resolve that churns within me. For all our planning, we're teetering on the edge of a knife. If even one thing goes wrong. The lock clicks open, a tiny sound swallowed by the vast, pressing silence. Alexei glances back, nodding to us, and then slips through the gate, disappearing into the shadows on the other side. Richard follows, his steps quick and quiet, and I bring up the rear, my heart racing faster with each step. The forest beyond the fence is a frozen expanse of trees and shadows, stretching out before us like some impossible dream. The air is sharper here, cleaner, almost free. The scent of pine mingles with the bitter bite of winter, and for a second, I feel something break loose inside me, something I haven't felt in years. Freedom, it's real, it's here. But our escape is only beginning. As we press deeper into the forest, Alexei raises a hand, stopping us. "There's an outpost a mile east," he whispers, his voice barely more than a breath. "We go south. There's less cover, but it's safer." Richard nods and I follow suit. My legs are numb from the cold, but each step forward feels like another layer of the camp peeling away. We move in silence, navigating around patches of snow and ice, our breaths fogging in the frigid air. Every so often, I hear Richard muttering under his breath, a habit of his, a way to keep his focus. I catch snippets of it sometimes, names of people he's left behind, names he clings to as a reminder of why he's here, why he's risking everything for a taste of freedom. Then, without warning, a noise shatters the silence. A gunshot, distant but unmistakable. My blood runs cold, and I whip around, scanning the darkness. Another shot echoes through the trees, followed by shouting. "They found the guard. They know we're gone. Move," Alexei hisses, his eyes blazing with urgency. He grabs my arm, pulling me forward, and we break into a run, our feet pounding against the frozen earth. The shouting grows louder, and I can hear the dogs barking now, their frenzied howls slicing through the night. My lungs burn with each breath, but I push harder, faster, desperate to outrun the voices, the dogs, the memory of that camp. We weave through the trees, the forest a blur around us. I can barely think, barely feel anything beyond the raw, desperate instinct to keep moving. Somewhere behind me, Richard stumbles, his breath ragged, but he pushes himself forward, his face contorted with determination. Alexei leads the way, his gaze fixed on the horizon, unyielding, unstoppable. The barking grows fainter, the voices receding, but we don't slow down. Not until we're sure. Not until we're certain we've lost them. Eventually, when my legs can no longer carry me, we collapse against the base of a tree, gasping for air. I feel the bark rough against my back, solid and real, a reminder that we're alive, that we made it this far. Richard leans against the tree beside me, his head tilted back, his eyes closed. For a moment, neither of us says anything, our breaths mingling in the cold night air, our exhaustion too deep for words. It's Alexei who finally breaks the silence. "We're not safe yet," he says, his voice hoarse but steady. "There's a village south of here, abandoned, from what I remember. We can rest there, just for the night." I nod, too tired to argue, too grateful for the chance to rest to question him. We pull ourselves to our feet and follow Alexei through the forest, each step heavier than the last. By the time we reach the edge of the village, I'm barely holding on. The buildings are dark, crumbling, remnants of lives left behind. But in this moment, they feel like sanctuary. We find shelter in an old barn, settling into the shadows, hidden from view. I collapse onto the straw-strewn floor, every muscle in my body aching, but there's a flicker of something in my chest, a warmth, a glow. This hope, fragile and delicate, but real. As I drift into an exhausted sleep, I hear Richard's voice beside me, barely a whisper. "We're going to make it, Henri. We're going to make it." I don't respond, but in the darkness, I feel the echo of his words settle into my bones. A promise as fierce and unbreakable as the stars above. The dawn is gray and somber, casting long shadows over the ruined village where we've taken refuge. I blink into the half-light, disoriented at first, then the weight of reality crashes back over me. The camp, the escape, the frantic run through the forest, all of it rushes back in an unyielding tide. Richard and Alexei are already awake, standing near the barn doors, looking out into the mist that hangs heavy over the trees. For a brief, quiet moment, the three of us stand there wordless, as if bound by some invisible thread that stretches back to that cold night in the camp. But we don't have the luxury of dwelling on it for long. Alexei's voice breaks the silence, rough but determined. "We need supplies, and we can't stay here. They'll be searching the forest, combing through every inch of it by now." "Where do we go?" Richard asks, his voice low, barely a murmur against the stillness. His gaze flickers across the village, taking in the ruined buildings, the open fields, the faint glint of a distant road. He's right to be cautious. There's nowhere safe for miles. Every step forward is a risk, each new direction a gamble. Alexei hesitates, his jaw clenched. "East," he says finally. "We move by night, find shelter during the day. There's a resistance group operating near the border. If we're lucky, we can reach them in a few days." A chill runs through me. The resistance. The stories about them are half legend, passed around the camp like forbidden secrets. whispered late at night when hope is something dangerous to hold on to. Men and women who refuse to bow down, who sabotage railways, steal weapons, free prisoners. But they are few, their numbers dwindling with each passing week. Reaching them feels as unlikely as the idea of our own freedom once had. Richard gives a tight nod. Then that's our chance. Before we leave, I sift through what's left in the barn, hoping to find anything that might help us. Scraps of cloth, bits of rope, a rusted blade, anything. But the barn is barren, stripped clean long ago by others who passed through here, survivors like us trying to make it out of the war alive. I find a broken shovel handle and wrap it in cloth, fashioning a makeshift weapon. It's pitiful, but it's better than nothing. We set off as soon as the sun begins to dip, weaving through the trees, keeping to the shadows. We walk in silence, our steps careful, each of us listening intently for any sign of pursuit. Every crack of a branch, every rustle in the bushes sends a jolt of fear through me, but I push it down, forcing myself to keep moving, one step after another. As the hours pass, my thoughts drift back to my life before all of this, the life I once took for granted. I think of my mother, her gentle hands, her warm laughter. I think of Marie, the way she'd tease me when I stumbled over my words, her smile bright enough to light up the darkest night. I wonder if they still believe I'm alive or if they've already mourned me, buried the memory of me along with so many others who vanished into the war. It's Richard who breaks the silence as we pause to catch our breath. "Do you ever wonder," he begins, his voice barely more than a whisper, "if we'll ever be able to go back? If there's still anything left of the lives we left behind?" Alexei's face hardens, his gaze distant. "Some things, once broken, can't be mended," he says. "But maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is that we live to see something else, something better." His words are quiet but fierce, carrying a weight I can't quite understand. I see it in his eyes, the haunted shadows of losses he doesn't speak about, memories he keeps locked away. The night wears on, each step growing heavier, each mile stretching further. When we finally stop to rest, exhaustion pulls at me like a physical weight, but sleep won't come. Richard lies beside me, his breath slow and steady, and across from us, Alexei sits with his back against a tree, his gaze fixed on the horizon. In the faint moonlight, he looks older, the lines of his face deepened by something unspoken, something ancient and weary. We move again before dawn, following Alexei's lead as he guides us through the wilderness. Days blur into nights and nights blur into days. Our pace is grueling, driven by desperation and fear, but in those quiet moments, a strange camaraderie forms between us. We're three broken souls, bound together by the same fragile hope, the same gnawing hunger for freedom. After 4 days, we reach the outskirts of a small town. From the shadows, we watch villagers move about, faces drawn and wary. There's tension in the air, the kind that comes from too many losses, too many close calls. I feel the fear return, a sick, twisting knot in my stomach. If we're recognized, if anyone suspects who we are, we're as good as dead. Alexei motions for us to wait as he scans the town. We need food, supplies, but we have to be careful. Richard and I nod, but my heart races. I can't shake the feeling that this is too close, too dangerous. We slip into the shadows of an abandoned building, taking shelter behind its crumbling walls as Alexei disappears into the night, his steps silent, purposeful. The weight is unbearable. Each minute drags by, stretching my nerves taut. I'm about to suggest that we search for him when he reappears, his face a mask of urgency. He's carrying a small bundle, bread, cheese, a few strips of dried meat. It's more than I've seen in weeks, but there's something else in his eyes. something that makes my blood run cold. "They know we're close," he whispers. "The soldiers are offering rewards, searching every village in the area. We need to move, now." Panic flares in my chest, but I force it down, focusing on the task at hand. We scarf down what little food we can, then set off once again, our pace quickened by the fear of pursuit. The hope that had sustained us over these past days is slipping, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the hunt. They're close, closer than we'd imagined, and if we're caught, the next few hours are a blur of running and hiding, weaving through fields and forests, our breaths ragged, our bodies exhausted. We stumble upon an old, abandoned cottage just as dawn breaks, and collapse inside, too worn to take another step. As we lie there, trying to catch our breath, I see the fear etched into Richard's face, the strain pulling at Alexei's features. But there, beneath the exhaustion, beneath the dread, I see something else, a shared resolve, a flicker of hope that refuses to die. "We're close now," Alexei murmurs, his voice barely a breath. "If we keep going, if we stay sharp, we'll make it." I cling to his words, letting them settle into my bones, anchoring me against the tidal wave of fear that threatens to consume me. We're battered, bruised, hunted, but we're still here. And as long as we're here, there's still a chance. For freedom, for survival, for each other. The day passes in tense silence. Huddled inside the abandoned cottage, we take turns resting, our bodies worn from the relentless days of fleeing and hiding. Richard and I sit by a cracked window, watching the edge of the woods where we came from, while Alexei sleeps in the shadows near the back, his breathing deep and steady. As night falls, a light snow begins to drift from the sky, softening the jagged edges of the forest and blanketing the world in a fragile peace. For a moment, I let myself imagine that we're safe, that we've reached the border, that our journey is finally over. But reality crashes back as Richard shifts beside me, his eyes scanning the darkness with that fierce intensity I've come to know. He's not resting either. None of us can, not until this is over. Alexei wakes just as the last trace of daylight fades, and we prepare to leave once more. The final stretch lies ahead of us. We're only a few miles from where he believes the resistance camp is hidden, but those miles feel like an ocean, a gap between life and death that could swallow us whole. None of us speak as we slip out of the cottage and into the forest, our steps soft, silent, each movement calculated and cautious. The night air is frigid, biting into our skin, but we push forward. The trees close around us, shadows stretching like fingers clawing at the ground. My heart pounds with each step, an endless, relentless drumbeat. We're so close, but danger clings to us, lingering in every gust of wind, every snap of a branch. Then, out of the silence, a gunshot rips through the night. We freeze, instinctively dropping to the ground. My mind races, but there's no time to think, no time to plan. Another shot follows, closer this time, and I feel the icy sting of fear settle deep in my gut. Alexei's eyes lock onto mine, his face taut with grim determination. "Run," he whispers, his voice barely audible. "Get to the camp. I'll lead them away." Richard shakes his head, grabbing Alexei's arm. "We're not leaving you behind." "There's no time," Alexei says, his tone fierce. "They're too close. If we all try to make a run for it, none of us will survive. I'll buy you time." His gaze softens for a brief moment, his hardened features melting into something that looks like peace, like acceptance. "If I don't come back, remember why we fought. Remember what we escaped for." My throat tightens, words sticking there, unable to form. This man, this stranger who became my brother in the fight for freedom, is about to sacrifice himself for us. And there's nothing I can say, nothing I can do to stop him. Before I can protest, Alexei slips into the shadows, his footsteps barely a whisper. The forest seems to close around him, swallowing him whole, and Richard and I are left in stunned silence, the weight of his sacrifice hanging heavy between us. "We can't waste this," Richard says, his voice choked but resolute. "He's buying us time. We have to go." We force ourselves to move, pushing through the forest, each step a painful reminder of the friend we've left behind. The shots grow fainter as we press on, but each one feels like a punch to the gut, a reminder that Alexei is facing our fate alone. My heart aches, guilt clawing at me, but I keep moving, knowing that his sacrifice will be in vain if we stop now. Finally, as dawn begins to break, casting the forest in a cold, gray light, we see it, a cluster of makeshift tents hidden deep in the trees. The resistance camp. Relief floods through me, but it's bittersweet, tainted by the absence of the man who guided us here. As we stumble into the camp, exhausted and broken, we're met by wary faces, eyes filled with suspicion and caution. A woman steps forward, her face hardened but her eyes sharp with understanding. She doesn't ask who we are or where we came from. She already knows. Instead, she motions for us to follow her to a small fire where a few other fighters are gathered. I barely register the warmth as I collapse onto the ground beside the fire, my body too numb, my mind too overwhelmed to process anything. Richard sits beside me, his face as hollow as I feel. For a long time, we simply sit there, letting the heat of the fire seep into our frozen bones. Finally, the woman speaks, her voice low and steady. "You made it," she says, and there's a hint of respect in her tone. "Not many do." I nod, barely able to meet her gaze. "There were 3 of us," I say, my voice barely a whisper. "Our friend. He didn't make it." She nods, a flicker of sadness crossing her face. "Alexei," she says, surprising me. "He was one of us once, sent back into the camps to gather information, to help those trapped behind the wire. He was a good man." The realization settles over me, filling in the gaps of his story. Alexei had known he might never make it out. He'd chosen to return to that hell, to endure unimaginable horrors, all for the chance to help others escape. I feel a surge of respect, of gratitude, but also a deep, searing pain that he's gone, that we'll never get to thank him, never get to see him walk free. The woman places a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. "He knew what he was doing, and he would want you to keep fighting, to carry on what he started." I look up, meeting her gaze, and for the first time, I feel a spark of purpose, a renewed sense of determination. Alexei's sacrifice wasn't just for our freedom. It was for a future, for something greater than the 3 of us. And now that future rests in our hands. In the days that follow, we join the resistance, our roles shifting from prisoners to fighters. Each mission, each act of defiance feels like a tribute to Alexei, a way to honor the man who gave his life so that we could be here. Richard and I fight side by side, our bond unbreakable, forged in the fires of survival and sacrifice. We're haunted by the memories of the camp, of the friends we left behind, but we press on, carrying those memories with us as a reminder of what we're fighting for. Months pass, and with each act of rebellion, we chip away at the enemy, a small force against a massive machine. And though freedom is still a distant, fragile hope, we hold on to it, refusing to let go. In the end, that hope, the same hope that bound us together in that camp, that carried us through the frozen forest, is what keeps us alive. And as I look up at the sky, the vast open sky without barbed wire slicing it apart, I feel a quiet sense of peace, of gratitude. I know that somewhere, in a world beyond this one, Alexei is watching, his spirit as unbroken as the day he led us to freedom.
For Alexei.
For all of us, for freedom.